Pushkin. Welcome back to Risky Business, a show about making better decisions. I'm Maria Konnikova.
And I'm Nate Silver. Today on the show, we'll talk happiness. Why are people in Finland so fucking happy?
It's because fucking in Finland both start with an F. You heard it here first, folks.
We're going to rely on a combination of actual survey data and mildly politically incorrect anecdata from Nate's travels around the world but do some serious analysis of, like, can you really tell which countries are happier than others? Is that a meaningful thing? And if so, what tends to predict it?
All right, let's do it. The World Happiness Report came out a few months ago. It's not recent news, but the underlying issues are eternal, right? Because happiness and what makes people happy and how you can even have a happiness ranking. Those are things that, those are perennial questions in psychology. From your standpoint, Nate, statistics are very interesting here. Like, how the hell do you rank how happy people are? But anyhow, so according to this report, Finland has been the happiest country in the world for a while now, for multiple years. And I've never been to Finland, but you are something of a Finland expert.
I
recently.
Look, my partner and I have a joke about, like, European American man travels to Europe and is now expert on Europe, right? And he regales people with, like, I guess predominantly European. I don't think I have any Nordic ancestry. Yeah, I went to Finland and to Norway back over Labor Day and had a great time. And those are both countries that are rated near the top, particularly Finland. And I guess the question is, like, when you're on the ground in Finland, do you notice outward signs of happiness? I noticed a lot of drinking. You go to the restaurant and you're offered a drink faster than anywhere I've ever been. I don't know where that fits into this, right? I noticed the sauna. I went to, like, the nice, like, touristy sauna. It seems kind of chilly. Just chill out. You can, like, actually basically grab more coals, get, like, a little shovel and grab more coals and put them in the burner, and it makes the sauna hotter. That seems very fun. Like, that's got to be worth, like, alone, like 0.2 points on the 10-point scale, I think. Good design and architecture. I noticed good, like, accommodations for children and, like, disabled and elderly people more than you find elsewhere in the world. The food was surprisingly good. We had excellent Georgian food. We had excellent kind of Sicilian food that has, like, Finnish flourishes with the Sicilian food and, like,
oh, that's fascinating.
Nice city, Helsinki. Not actually as populous as it seems. And then Norway, they just have the fucking, like, most beautiful landscapes.
Sure, yeah,
on Earth, but
I haven't been to Norway either, but I really want to go. I want to go to Finland as well. So I don't want the Finns to take this amiss. But the fjords in Norway, I mean, man, their reputation just precedes them, and I would really love to see that.
The first day we were there, my partner, like, kind of drove out to, like, some little mini fjords, right? And we're like, this is like Maine. It's pretty fucking nice, right? And then we took a cruise to the real. It's like, that's not a knife. That's a knife. What's the crocodile then be like?
A knife. That's a knife.
That's not a fjord. That's a fjord. By the way, do you know that the Hudson River Valley is a fjord?
I did not know that. Mm-hmm. Actually, I think I did know that at some point in time, but I've forgotten, and now I relearned it.
I tell people that.
Yeah, I think you've probably told me this in the past, but thank you for retelling me, because I've effectively forgotten.
So as a fjord expert, I have to tell you that these fucking fjords were like, Machu Picchu's pretty amazing, and, like, Hawaii, like, those are probably the top 3, I guess, that I've been to.
That's great. Well, This is all good. We've got some local color. Now let's step back a little bit and talk just a little bit about how this World Happiness Report, how the ranking is created. So they actually base the ranking on one single question called the Cantrell ladder. And this is the question. So Nate, you have to imagine a ladder with steps numbered from 0 at the bottom to 10 at the top. The top of the ladder is the best possible life for you. The bottom of the ladder is the worst possible life for you. On which step of the ladder would you say you personally feel you stand at this time? So that is the one question that they use.
Are you asking me?
Yeah, go ahead. What do you think?
9.
Nice.
I'm trying to be realistic, right? Like best
Yeah.
possible versus like, do I think I got a pretty good draw for a lot of things? Yeah.
Sure. And so the data for this are collected actually by the Gallup World Poll. And so, insofar as, you have any kind of thoughts about the quality of the data, that's where they're coming from. So they're not doing a poll of their own. They're just taking that one question from Gallup, which has been conducted since 2005. And every single year, it's about a little bit over 100,000 people in 140,000 countries and territories that participate in the poll. And so it's about 1,000 people per country that are contacted either face-to-face or by phone. And what this report does is they take the rankings from the last 3 years for each country and they average them so that they get a higher size of respondents. So, for instance, their 2005 rankings are actually 2002 to 2004, so that they get at least 3,000 people per country that they include. If countries have significantly fewer than this, they exclude them from the rankings. So just first, like in terms of statistics, how does this strike you in terms of sample size, in terms of how the Gallup poll does its sampling? Gallup tends to be one of the more reliable polls, right?
Yeah, look, I think there can always be sampling biases in who's surveyed and who's not, right? In general, people who are disadvantaged in various ways are harder to reach via poll. I think the bigger question is like, how universal is this
Yeah.
question, right?
Well, that is a huge question. And the reason they tried to do this latter is because they think it's one of the more universal ways that you can ask it. Right, that it doesn't have any sort of cultural baggage or any other things that might, in some countries, factor X might be something that you associate with happiness, whereas in others, that might tell you something totally different. So they've tried to get this universal question. Now, I will caveat this by saying in psychology research, like self-report, it's kind of like democracy. It's the best possible system of governance out of a lot of bad ones, right? In the sense that it's not perfect and there are lots and lots of issues with self-report data, but it's kind of the best we have, right? In the sense of like, well, how else are you going to ask something that's so internal? We're not asking about like something that we can measure, as in like your exact income, quality of life, et cetera, et cetera. We're asking about how happy you personally are. And so the best thing we can do is just ask you directly, but we know that those sorts of data are problematic, right? That asking people is not always reliable. But it's the best we have. It's the best we have.
It's probably better than experts presuming, you tell me you're happy, Maria, but there's a whole debate about like whether conservatives or liberals are more happy, or basically liberal self-report, lower happiness. There's a debate about like how literally that should be interpreted. We can circle back to that maybe. I mean, one other thing that seems pertinent about this latter formulation is it might encourage you to like look around at your neighborhood, at nearby examples, approximate examples of people who are better off than you, right? In the United States, in the Middle East, we have very prominent examples of extreme wealth and extreme excess and or excellence and or achievement and or privilege, right? In everything, pretty much, right? The U.S. seems to be, I've actually run some numbers on this stuff, relatively, like, pretty happy country, right? But like, we're a little lower than you'd think given how rich we are overall. So, what do countries like Finland have in common? Number one, they have relatively low wealth and income inequality.
Yep.
Relatively low where the floor is high, the ceiling is also high-ish, right? But like relatively low compared to US, China, Middle East, Latin America.
Yep. And by the way, let me just caveat that with saying that a lot of the countries that are at the top of these polls tend to be smaller. And I think that goes hand in hand with what you're saying.
Small, right? I mean, it's not true for all small countries,
No.
right? I like Finland. I also like Greece. We had a very nice time in Athens a few years ago, and we thought we're going to go around. Athens is going to be boring. We just loved Athens so much we just stayed there, right? But Greece has been through a lot in terms of economic distress and bailouts. Greece has a lot of history, a lot of baggage with that history. One of my good friends is Greek American, and it's a little bit of an angstier kind of culture.
Sure.
I think I get a lot, the Greeks and the Russians and and the Jews. They kind of, Israel's very happy. They kind of have some similar stories, right? Italy. I went to Italy on a book tour, and the guy who translated my book, he's like, yeah, all Italians were still living in the shadow of like our history. And Italy is a country that's like not super happy. So like a country that's like content with its place in the world or which teaches contentment, it seems like it's going to excel on this survey, which is not to say it's not a valid measure, but like that context, I think, is important. And the small thing is important too. Almost all the countries that rank highly are small. They are not necessarily, so one thing I looked at is there a correlation? Because we can be on PC on this show, Maria.
Sure.
Is there a correlation in either direction between the number of foreign-born residents and happiness, controlling for other factors?
That's a super important question. Like, it doesn't matter whether we're PC or not. Like, this is actually
the answer
crucially
is,
important.
is no, actually. If anything, there's a positive correlation because countries that are more successful tend to attract more immigrants if they should let them in, right? Now, what do you think some people would say is that in these smaller countries that you're able to incorporate the other cultures more organically, right? I don't know if that's true either. I mean, if you go to Finland, there are tons of ethnic, quote unquote, restaurants everywhere. And I'm sure that, the spice level is probably a little bit dumbed down, but it's a pretty multicultural place. I think, Norway, the impression I get is that Norway's a little stricter about certain types of things, right? So it might vary more from place to place, or, if you're too strict, I mean, Italy and Japan are places where, these are all places I've been, right? Where it's thought to be a little bit harder to integrate potentially, right? Whereas South Korea is a little more open-minded, but so there's lots of different factors happening here. I think also, so South Korea is a country that is both according to the survey and according to some measures like mental health measures, I could argue that fertility rate might be an indicator of something, right? Like South Korea is kind of unhappy, but it grew prodigiously from being in the lower end of developing countries, right, 40 years ago to higher per GDP per capita than Japan and all but a handful of countries in the world now, right? And I wonder if that growing up too fast leads to some angst, the sense of
some dislocation. Yeah. So when I think these are all really, really important considerations, and the World Happiness Report team did try to kind of do some economic modeling to look at the variation as well, and they found that there are 6 variables that from 2005 onwards account for about 3/4 of the variation in happiness. And those variables are having somebody to count on, so kind of social support, which makes sense, right? And that dovetails with a lot of research on happiness. We can talk more about that, like community support, et cetera. Log GDP per capita. Nate, you'll have to break that down a little bit for people because log GDP per capita is not like something that rolls off the tongue. Healthy life expectancy, obviously important. Freedom to make life choices, generosity, and freedom from corruption. So those are the 6 factors that they found correlate most highly with that overall ranking. So log GDP per capita, can you just unpack that for a second, and then we'll talk about everything else?
That just means that you're taking the natural logarithm. So it depends on which base you're using. But if you have what's the per capita income of Mexico is 20,000. That might be wrong. 18,000. I have no idea. Right. Whereas in Norway, it's 100,000. Right. The day-to-day life is not 5 times better in Norway than in Mexico. Right. Kind of practical realized wealth, even if you use kind of purchasing power parity adjusted versions of it, right? So long as you're saying there's diminishing returns to wealth.
Great. And 14,000, Mexico is the
14,000. Okay. Yeah, but like $4,000, like some relatively poor country in Africa versus 14,000 is a bigger difference than 14,000 to 100,000, or similar at least, right? And like a log scale will at least compress that a little bit.
Yeah, so that actually makes a lot of sense, because what we know about happiness from kind of the happiness research outside of this particular measure or anything like that is that the old takeaway that, you can't buy happiness is bullshit. That's not true. Money does matter. And you do have to have a certain amount of money. And with more money, you do get happier. But there are diminishing returns, right? So that's true up to a certain point, and then it kind of flattens out. So it's much more nuanced. But yes, after a certain rate, like those returns are so high at the beginning. And then once you're kind of comfortable and are able to like have some sort of certainty, right? Some sort of stability. After that, the returns are still there, right? But they are lower than they were at the beginning when you had to do that, as you say, like from 4,000 to 14,000, like that is huge. Like that, and kind of standard of living.
You've seen a lot of, you can argue that like Western Europe is taking a little bit of an off ramp from further growth in GDP, right? Like, if you have if every person has access to their own home, access to healthcare, access to purchase meals and necessities at least, and then to have some small little luxuries, and to have like a workday that doesn't require them to work in adverse conditions or excessive numbers of hours, right? Like, and some family or friend support networks, right? Though that's not an easy list of things. It's not a small list of things whatsoever, right? But like, maybe when you get to that, then people have rationally less incentive for further gains. And to the extent you do have gains, it might be from the financialization of different sectors, or it might be from people who do really want to take risks, right? People who are playing the game, and like that, America, China, Middle East, these more dynamic quote unquote places have more of that than Europe, where you talk to Europeans, like, what are the frontier AI labs in Europe? And they're like, oh, we don't have any. Literally. So that's interesting, I suppose.
That's really interesting. And most of the top rated countries are in Europe, right? In terms of happiness, which is.
Yeah, most of them, almost all. I think Canada's pretty well, right?
Yeah.
There are cultures, in general, relative to GDP, the Americas are Latin America is a happier region than Asia, controlling for GDP and these other factors, right?
Yes.
Why is that?
Absolutely true.
I don't know. It's easy to kind of backfit. You go to Mexico or Peru and you're like, oh, people just kind of, the culture is sunnier and people seem,
For sure. But there are, something that this kind of type of ranking doesn't measure that I think, might partially explain what we're seeing with South America versus Asia is that there are cultural differences in how people just kind of their baseline, how they experience life, right? It's the way that they kind of grew up, the language that they grew up using, kind of the things that have been socialized from early childhood in terms of like, what's your attitude, right? Are you an optimist? Are you a pessimist? Like, this sounds kind of crazy, but there are some cultures that are actually like just inherently more optimistic cultures. There are some cultures that are just inherently more pessimistic cultures. And that kind of stuff matters, right? Because those kinds of mindsets, those kinds of psychological shifts can actually affect how you feel on a day-to-day basis. And so there are these just like baseline factors that exist that you've just learned from day one, right? That's just the way that you were raised.
Yeah, no,
and none of these surveys capture that.
Stoicism is kind of another attribute. This is a big difference between men and women and conservatives and liberals, right? So now I'm working the story in, right? If you look at data and if you ask people, are you mentally healthy, right? Conservatives and men are considerably more likely to say yes than liberals and women, right? If you ask people, did you have a good day today? The difference kind of evaporates. So the libs will say, well, that proves that there's a stigma over mental health. And I might say, this is a liberal but a man, right? I might say, look, no, actually men are more stoic and they're able to say it's okay sometimes to not have every day be the most exciting or not have everything go your way, right? We don't have to be as expressive about it. And actually that's a sign of better mental health, right? You don't have to, turn us all into therapy patients or whatever else, right? And if I were to stereotype, I would say that Mexico is a more expressive culture than Japan or Korea, right? If the woke police want to beat me down for that, I mean, I think most people would agree with that probably, right? And so that can get, whenever a human is asking another human on a survey or conducting an internet instrument on a survey, that becomes a little bit loaded potentially.
Absolutely. And like we said at the beginning, they really have tried with this latter kind of question to cut through a lot of the cultural noise, but it doesn't, in the sense that those mental frameworks, that kind of those things that are acceptable, not acceptable, just the way that you perceive life in general is going to be influenced by those things. And your answer to that latter is going to differ based on those early life / social kind of pressures, no matter what. And I also want to add a factor that, so talking about, un-PC things to say, like another big thing in happiness, like genetics is actually a factor here. Like some levels of life satisfaction and kind of how you perceive life, there's a degree of heritability to that, right? Where, like, for whatever reason, right, whether it's kind of your overall mental health, how your brain processes information, whatever combination of genes you have, that can affect how you see the world to a certain extent, right? It's not 100% heritability or anything close to that, but there is a heritability element to that. And then if we actually go even further out to like nations like Finland, places that have been more kind of smaller, more homogenous, like there is that genetic factor actually is part of it, I think. And you start realizing that, we have like a population that, might be genetically more predisposed to a certain way of experiencing the world, a certain way of expressing themselves in the world. Like I said, small piece of it, but a piece of it all the same. And when we're talking about something as huge as happiness, all those small pieces matter. We'll be back right after this.
One thing you do notice in like the Nordics is like there's a lot of reinvestment into like kind of public spaces and social services, right? Like they have time to have a little bit more refinement in everything from like museums to parks to restaurants, airports, right? Things like that. Is that downstream from having lower inequality, or is it downstream from being more democratic? I think a lot of the research finds that like democracies are happier, right? I found that in my own work too. The US, by the way, as it has become on a spectrum, less democratic, has also become less happy for what it's worth, right?
Absolutely.
But then you still don't know what the cause and effect are, right? Maybe it's that, okay, this is kind of a liberal, I think overly generous in some ways interpretation of Trump, but they say inequality triggered backlash and backlash triggered Trump, and now Trump is dismantling democratic institutions, right? So like the root cause is actually inequality, right? Those kind of things are very difficult to entangle or disentangle.
Yeah, they absolutely are. And by the way, since you mentioned the United States and kind of the fall in happiness with the lessening democratic norms, I think that actually dovetails with two of the other things that we see on the list, which is freedom to make life choices, right? So that's kind of part of democracy, and freedom from corruption. And we know that actually the US has just plummeted on the corruption index, right? So I do think that's really interesting. But yeah, we don't know, especially with things like generosity, like cause and effect. Man, that's really, really hard. But generosity does kind of there is a reciprocal relationship there. And I don't know with something like happiness how one even does a statistical analysis to try to disambiguate cause and effect. Like in a data set like this, I don't know if you can.
Yeah, no, if you read anecdotal like accounts of people who live, expats living in countries like India, where maybe the rule of law is relatively weak, it's like, well, every single thing is a negotiation. A contract is not necessarily a contract, right? And like, if you look at kind of like, what are the different pillars of like the Industrial Revolution, the European Enlightenment? One of the ones that's like kind of less sexy is like just contract law and like property rights and things like that, right? I mean, think about how many things you do, Maria, that rely on high trust. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
By the way, this happens in the poker world too. Oh, I forgot my wire. Can you lend me X to play in this tournament?
Yep.
I'm entering this high stakes betting pool. I mean, it's just lots of stuff that like, and I'm much more careful about that than 90% of poker players, but like just the things are a lot smoother if not everything is like fucking scratching your nails on a chalkboard trying to ensure that what's supposed to happen happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like the underlying point there, which is a really important one, is that we don't want to constantly be expending all of these resources on whatever it is, whether it's pure survival, right? That's like the money thing, or just like trying to go through life on a day-to-day basis. And we do have data that show that societies with higher levels of generalized trust tend to be much more successful, right? They tend to, I'm not talking about happiness right now. I'm talking about just like economically successful, because the fewer resources you have to expend on that, the more you can actually use to pay attention to things that are important to you and that matter to you, your own well-being, your family, your friends, things that you want to be doing. And if everything is a struggle, right, then it's really, really tough to get out from that cognitive load and to try to have the mental space that you need to think, to relax, to create, to actually be a successful human being and not just a human being who's surviving. By the way, if you think about your answers to different questions, right, such as like the more global, how happy are you versus like, how's your day going, right? How are things going right now? You will end up getting very different answers quite often because people, and this actually goes back to what I was saying about genetics and about different societies, people do often have like a set happiness level, after a certain point. And the data that shows that, people after they win the lottery, like tend to like fall back to where they were before, or people who become quadriplegic also tend to kind of level out to where they were before. I think that, and those studies have held up, and those are very interesting data points that show that you have this day-to-day fluctuation, and then you have these baseline set rates. And yet, even with all of those things, you do have societies that tend to be overall happier versus other societies. So there are all of these different factors playing at the same time. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why happiness research is so fascinating and why I try to be one of those people who tries to be happier, right? And tries to use the research that I know about kind of those mental frameworks, those mental feedback loops to push myself to be happier, because there is, mind-body connection. There's research that shows that if you smile more, you're actually going to start feeling a little bit better. Like if you can trick yourself, you can trick your mind by kind of acting in a happier way.
Yeah, poker rewires your brain, or I guess for that matter, other gambling kind of rewires your brain in slightly weird ways. Who was this interview with? Was it Steven Chidwick or I forget who it was, right? It was some player who was asked why he didn't appear happier when he's doing really well in a tournament, right? And it's like, well, anyone who's been in a tournament knows that until you actually finish the tournament, there's absolutely nothing guaranteed about it, right? So you kind of train yourself like not to celebrate these like interim successes and like and you particularly yeah, go ahead.
I have to say, Nate, I don't know about you, but I always like feel a perverse pleasure in watching those videos when someone celebrates too early, like when there's still one card to come and they're like doing this victory dance, like, yes, I won, and going absolutely crazy, and then they lose. I'm like, serves you right. Like, do not celebrate too early. And one of the other things we were talking about is in terms of trust, like, I do think that that is something that is very, and we've talked about this before, it's something that's so funny in the poker world, right? Where you can, like, you take things on trust and end up trusting people with vast amounts of money, where other people who aren't poker players would be like, what in the world are you doing? Right? You just gave that person like 10 grand or whatever it is. And you and I, Nate, have actually given each other money that way. But I'm very careful. Like, I will only actually do that with few people because I'm not a poker player. And at the end of the day, I'm someone who has studied con artists, breaches of trust, all of these things. And I know that, you just never want to put yourself in a situation where you'll be out that money.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I unless you're comfortable with it being gone, right? Unless it's a gift.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the other thing. Yeah. Unless you're absolutely comfortable with it being totally gone. And there's some very funny stories about that in the poker world. Phil Ivey is known for giving very, very generous tips. There's a funny massage story where someone didn't have cash and asked Phil Ivey to tip for him. And I think Phil threw like a 5K chip or something to the masseuse.
Oh,
and that was with Nick Schulman. It's a very funny story that Nick Schulman tells. That was that's not a debt that you wanted to incur in the moment. I think Nick was probably waiting for like $100 tip or something a little bit smaller.
And we'll be right back after this break.
One of the things that we haven't talked about too much, which I think we should at least a little bit, is the fact that the one factor that's been shown over and over to correlate with both life expectancy and happiness, and it's something that this happiness score has pointed out, they say having someone to count on. But the one factor that we see in all sorts of longitudinal studies are just community, right? Social connection, having friends, being a part of something. And that doesn't need to mean religion, although that's one of the reasons. That's a confounding variable why people who are religious often tend to be happier, because they have that inbuilt community. But it doesn't have to be that. It could actually be absolutely anything. It could be poker, Nate. It could be, your community of poker friends. But it's having people that you actually see in real life, that you have a rapport with, that you spend time with, that you have kind of this support network. And yes, kind of having a spouse can be great too, although that is a double-edged sword, because if you're unhappy in your marriage, that detracts from happiness. But in general, like, that social connection is absolutely huge. And that's something that we also haven't talked about in terms of, different countries, like, and different ways of treating family, right? Does your extended family live with you? How do you kind of look at that? Do you have an inbuilt social connection, an inbuilt community? And this is something that I think a lot of people either take for granted or don't even realize how important it is. And I think it's something that will become increasingly more important as more and more of our lives are online. And we do see this social fragmentation with people not necessarily doing as many things outside the home with other people as they have in the past.
Yeah, the Nordics I tend to associate with bigger, open kind of outdoor spaces. It seemed like the Finns in particular, you had like a fair number of like big groups roaming around, whereas like something very interesting I found in South Korea, or in Seoul at least, was that like when you go to a restaurant that's sufficiently nice, they will put your group in like a private room, and that is seen as like the highest prestige thing, as you go with a group of 4 friends, right? And you go to a private room or with your family, right? And it's kind of like, okay, well, what's the point of, I guess like the point of going out is that they can cook, of course, very well, better than you can, right? But like the other point of being, no, we're out in the community and we're out in a communal space, right? Is like, So yeah.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, that goes hand in hand with where we know they fall on the global happiness rankings.
I know, yeah. Try dropping those walls, have some community. Yeah.
Don't we love when anecdotal data actually supports the statistics?
Well,
of
I
the
don't think it's like common, because it's seen as a places that are seen as like having a constraint on space, right? That having space is kind of like the luxury, right? If you look like the luxury class on like Korean Air, right? It's not that nice. It's just a lot of space, because space is rare in these extremely dense, like Asian countries, right? And that might not be true so much in other parts of the world.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so let's to wrap up, Nate. If you were to nominate your own new happiest country based on no data whatsoever, what would you say? Or do you want to keep Finland in the lead?
I guess Finland.
Yeah,
People in Hudson, New York seem very happy. It's all artisanal. Everything.
The country of Hudson.
It could be a communist country practically. Yeah.
Yeah.
They seem happy though.
All right, cool.
What's the happiest? What's the place you've seen that you'd say this place is happy? It doesn't have to be a whole country.
I would nominate. Well, I'm going to do a country. I'm going to nominate Andorra.
Really?
Because people there have a lot of money, and it's gorgeous, right? You just have like just absolutely stunning vistas, and it's small, right? And there aren't that many people there, and it's a tax haven. So yeah, I would say that I'm guessing. I don't actually know if Andorra, I'm not looking at the rankings anymore. They're not in front of me. So I don't know if Andorra is even part of this or if it's too small. But yeah, Andorra, Monaco, like I would bet that people in countries like that are probably pretty happy.
They're a little, apologies to our 5 listeners from Monaco. Are people there a little soulless in the tax havens?
Yeah, no, that's why I said Andorra and not Monaco. But I think that Monaco shares some of the things with Andorra, but Andorra, I'm guessing, is a happier place, because in general, like, there are a lot of parts. So Andorra is its own country, but we're talking about close proximity to Spain, and the weather there is nice, and there are, by the way, even though we do know that like Nordic countries can be obviously the happiest in the world, but sunshine and sun exposure is correlated to happiness levels anyway. And Spain can be a happier country if you go like region by region, but there are some very poor parts of Spain. There's a lot of civil unrest in some parts of it. You've got Basque Country and like the secession stuff. So there's a lot of stuff keeping Spain from the top. But Andorra has a lot of the good things that Spain has without a lot of that baggage. So that's why I nominate Andorra. I wonder if our Andorran listeners agree with this or not. But it is beautiful. I encourage you to at least look at photographs. And on that note, Nate, let's wrap and go and be happy, and let's go and increase the happiness rating of Risky Business by encouraging more reviews that are positive. Let us know what you think of the show. Reach out to us at riskybusiness@pushkin.fm. Risky Business is hosted by me, Maria Konnikova.
And by me, Nate Silver. The show is a co-production of Pushkin Industries and iHeartMedia. This episode was produced by Isaac Carter. Our associate producer is Sonia Gerwitt. Lydia Jean Cott and Daphne Chen are our editors, and our executive producer is Jacob Goldstein. Mixing by Sarah Bruguer.
If you like this show, please rate and review us so other people can find us too. But once again, only if you like us. We don't want those bad reviews out there. Thanks for tuning in.